Thank you very much. First, we had to change things here so we wouldn't sit that close to each other, like chicken on a row. And first of all, I want to wish all of you a nice and very inspiring evening. First of all, I want to welcome our guests here on the panel, John Burnside. And let me mention the interpreters, Isabel Henderson and Ann-Kathrin Ender, behind in the room, and thank them. Let me be brief. John Burnside is poet and writer from Scotland. He published his first book of poems in 1988. And he has been working as a software developer before for computer industry. And he started early with internet activities with the Poetry Society. Daniel Kehlmann denominated him as a language creator par excellence. And his autobiographic novel that has been published in 2006, A Lie About My Father, is a book about that. Thomas Glavnik said that is a book that allows the reader to understand his own life and to give a voice to things he has been thinking of decades, but he didn't realize. Usually it's poets that speak out things that we didn't realize or we didn't dare to say. This spring, his novel, A Summer of Drowning, has been published. And Daniel Kehlmann's first novel was published in 1997, but he had his worldwide breakthrough with The Measurement of the World, and published in 2005. It has been translated in many languages, and a film has been made about it, and he has published also essays and poetry lectures, and his new novel, Fame, published in 2009. It's a novel in 9 stories, and in one story he deals with the gradual loss of identity in the built-up in media technology. So this is one of the issues we're going to deal with this evening. And Daniel Kehlmann, many of you might know, he was one of the first signatories of the action plan, We Are the Creators. I would like to start with these 2 attitudes that we could describe. The first one says that the digital media creates something of a secondary effect because it doesn't really affect the creative process. It's only the result that is the important thing, but not the way this result has been achieved. And on the other side, we can find the world of Gutenberg that led to very severe changes.
What do you think? What's your opinion? What are the alternatives? What do you think about this opinion? Who starts?
I'm taking my headphones off, not to be distracted, but there's nothing going on. I think it's somewhere in between. There's a kind of medium is the message thing. Obviously, it's going to happen. But the creative element initially isn't going to be very much affected by the medium that it conveys it, unless the creator engages with the making and says, well, actually, yeah, I'm interested in doing this in the way that only this medium will be able to, this medium will best serve it. But I mean, I think the average poet isn't going to care how their poem is going to be presented. They just want to say what they want to say. Some poets will be interested in media, perhaps to disguise something, perhaps to disguise a lack of ability or form, maybe. But I think it becomes more interesting for people who are at one end of the kind of novel process. It's interesting for me. I wanted to make a kind of novel for about 5 or 6 years now. I wanted to make this novel, which would be would actually be a kind of black hole, and I would probably disappear into it, never come out. But I would hope that eventually some part of it would come out to be a black hole for readership to disappear into it with me, and it would actually take everyone back into the past, into the 1950s, and we'd all disappeared in the 1950s. Just before the Kennedy assassination happened, everyone in the world would disappear, so the Kennedy assassination would never happen.
Sounds more like a game than a novel.
No, it would be a novel, but yeah, it'd be a multimedia kind of novel, and it could be on a different platform. People get bugged by kind of talking about platforms. You know, oh, well, this would fit the iPad 2, or this would fit this, or this would fit that. But in the end, by the time you've finished developing something like that, the platform that it would run on doesn't exist yet. There would be a new platform by the time you got to the end of the process. So this for me, this kind of novel is interesting, almost as a kind of theoretical thing. And it's a bit like the old avant-garde as opposed to the new avant-garde. The old avant-garde was interested in ideas and didn't have to actually realize them. And I think this novel, for me, is more fun talking about it than actually doing it. Which is always true of novels anyway, isn't it, Daniel? It's hard work to actually make the damn thing, but talking about it is great fun, and the theory of it is great fun. And I think that's what we should do. We should use maybe some of the new ideas they're not that new, actually. Some of them are very old, digital ideas, as a kind of provocation, as a way of being more avant-garde again. But avant-garde in the old way. Avant-garde in the way that John Cage was avant-garde, as opposed to avant-garde by the kind of comfortable, subsidy, funded avant-garde people of today do things. So just, go out on a limb and really just kind of, theorize and have some fun. Be more like Joseph Beuys or Kurt Schwitters than, I won't mention any names, we all know who they are.
Ja, ich muss 2 Dinge vorausschicken.
I have to say 2 things first. First of all, it's true, when I was asked whether I joined this panel discussion tonight, I was really enthusiastic about it, I have to confess. But I have to say, the email I received, I just flew over it, I didn't read it thoroughly. I was so enthusiastic to have a panel discussion together with John that I didn't think about the topic, because I really like his works, but I really like to talk about this topic. But the main reason for me to be here is to sit next to this famous author. I have to say this, I'm sorry. The other thing is, I came here knowing that I have to talk in English because I'm proud that I can talk in English, I can speak English. But then the question arises, well, there are the 2 interpreters, can you speak in German? And then we said, well, it's maybe even better, because you do not annoy the auditors with your strange accent in English and the ability to express in a better way in your mother tongue. There was a famous quote, do you know when it is when you start talking and in the middle of a sentence you have to change your whole opinion because you do not know the vocabulary? So now I'm very grateful to express myself in my mother tongue, because I think it's better. Well, according to your question, or the question you raised, has 2 sides of a coin. The first one is, what about the traditional genres? The novel is a traditional genre. Do you write in a different way when you use new medias, maybe if you use the computer? Or if you want to have new technology, new readers? I think and hope it's not the way. I hope it doesn't influence the way of writing. It would be awful if you'd be influenced by such things. If you are influenced by, for instance, if you write with a computer or with a pen, if this changes your text, well, it might be possible, but as an author, you always hope that it's not the case. Where does it stop? Are you a verse author when you write while it's raining? How big must the room be in which you are working in? You are always hoping that you work independently of all the other external influences. What is the reality is a totally different case. The other very exciting aspect is the one John tackled, namely in how for new media produce new forms of telling stories. And this is something I've been thinking about for a while, not because I like to do it, but because I'm very interested in that. I'm interested in the fact, can a computer game be arts in a way or the other? And I think theoretically that might be the case. There was one computer game, I read an article in a newspaper, I think it was Atlantic Monthly newspaper some months ago, about the computer game Braid, which is seen by the insiders as the first computer game which is really a piece of art. And unfortunately, I have to confess, I didn't get too far because it was too difficult for me to play it. So I cannot tell you whether it's a real piece of art or not. But I do think that it might be possible to create art out of computer games. But I think this will trigger deeper philosophical problems. Because if you follow a novel, you're just a spectator, you watch, you are in a position of a viewer, of a spectator, and those who are involved in a computer game, you are involved in the computer game, you have an internal view. It's a different perspective, but I think it leads us away from our initial discussion.
So this is a very important concept. It's a concept of avant-garde. This was John Burnside said. This is something that follows the text, and this leads to two questions. The first one would be, is it possible to deal with the concept of avant-garde in the way it was connected to the beginning of the last century, or where it meant a kind of segregation from other movements? Or also is the question, how can a reader follow the text, even if it, for example, changes at times? And is the experience of reading, is it linear or is it not linear? Does this affect the reader? Or what you said, John, is this a different way of experiencing reading? So we should ask if one thing would be, would writing be changed, but also would reading be changed if we are not told stories in the traditional way we were used to?
There's something that's kind of interesting that's going on alongside that and kind of parallel to that. And it isn't just about art. It's about, well, what we call art. Sometimes we recognize something as art in a new medium because it conforms to a value set that we have about art in an older medium. So, for example, maybe we're looking for a game that looks like art. A computer game looks like art because it looks a bit like art used to look in the world where, before computer games, as it were. And the question is that, of course, is who consumes computer games? There's my kids play a game now. What's it called? Damn. There are these kind of characters, and you have a arena. And you put the characters into the arena, you can take them out and put new ones in and exchange them. And the child at this point is deciding strategically which character would be the best for this stage of the game. So at a certain point, you need to be big and strong, so you put your big strong guy in, and then you need to be fast. So you take the strong guy out and you put the fast guy in. And that can become more and more sophisticated. I'm talking about a 7-year-old who's an adept at this. He rises to grandmaster levels in all these games and things. So there's that. And there's that kind of consumption. And I think you could extend that from children to adults. And adults don't play enough in our society. So a radical thing that would happen is that we would play better by using new media to engage more, be more immersed in an artistic experience as a kind of game. A lot of research has been done on the level of immersion we have to have in a game or in enjoying a kind of novel experience, a roman experience in a new technology, in a film or whatever it might be. The other thing that would be really radical and be really interesting is, and it's always the test of every new technology, is what happens when pornography is put into that technology. I mean, let's face it, most people go on the internet, apparently, to watch pornography, okay? So if they're going onto the internet, and what they're seeing is basically the same thing as they saw in dirty pictures as they used to have in the old days, men in raincoats going to Leicester Square or someplace to look at these awful, dreadful movies. If what they're seeing when they watch this on new technology is the same thing, then we've failed dramatically. But wouldn't it be interesting if new technology allowed us to be more inventive in our sexual fantasy, for example? Could that make us more interesting people, more generous people, more gentle people, rather than the sort of rubbish that men have been consuming for centuries, for aeons? So all these different areas of consumption, and we can move out into these different things as well. We were talking about, before we came in, we were talking about thrillers. You can imagine the thriller reader who likes the genre finding new ways to expand and work in that genre with new technology. And you could have more and more kind of reference. And television does it, for example, where you've got this kind of wonderful play of references. There's a great essay by David Foster Wallace about this, a unibus plurum. It's all about how television, little references and jokes in television. If you're a really avid watcher of television, it enriches the experience. And there's another thing about television being art. Suddenly we had something which was, people were saying, this is seriously art, television is art, and that was The Wire. And why did we think The Wire was art? It was because it reminded people of Shakespeare. Had the same kind of complexity in terms of character and the richness of dialogue. So again, we're recognizing something that's art because it looks like something that we already know is art. But when Peter Greenaway made films, Peter Greenaway can't get money to make films anymore, it would appear. But when Greenaway made films, there were a new form of art, a new kind of art. They were too challenging for people, and people, well, certainly in Britain, rejected them. I don't know, I think he's more popular on the continent. But we need people to find, in new media, find new ways of using them that aren't recognizable as things that we already know and therefore challenge us. So we have to have pornographers who make a kind of pornography that lifts the average consumer of pornography out of the cesspit of what we all normally use and become an imaginative and creative person. We need people who make children's games to really challenge and extend children and make them into little anarchists, so that they can challenge and question the system in which they exist. And we need kind of artists who make, novels and movies and symphonies to use new technology to broaden what they do and to make it more challenging.
Ja, dem würde ich gar nicht so viel hinzufügen, außer eben, dass ich es auch interessant und bemerkenswert finde.
I think it is very interesting how much creativity is in one trivial computer game, because every computer game creates a new world. Nothing is given. There are no physical laws. They have to be invented for the world of computer game. That's why it's so expensive to develop computer games. It can't be done by one person alone. It requires huge groups of people, teams working together, and I'm not so much into that, but for a certain period of time I tried to be up to date when it comes to new computer games. It's several years ago, but I'm now not up to date anymore. But back then it was a computer game called Mafia. During this game you have to steal a car, you have to drive this car away, hand it over to another person, and I do not know why. Maybe I think I wanted to have a coffee, so I made a break in between. I stopped in the middle of the motorway, and in a computer game I parked the car, I jumped out of the car, so not me but the character in the computer game, and I looked around, and then suddenly I realized one of the lanes was had a different color. as the car didn't follow the lane. And here I thought, well, it starts to be art. How big is the possibility that someone parks right here and jumps out of the car to see this derivation in the lane? I think I was the first one doing that, but just in case someone is doing it, there was something provided by the game, and this is what we expect from great novels. That exactly there where we stop, make a break, that they have something for us. Unfortunately, this computer game was very trivial. It was about stealing, fighting, shooting without an added value. However, in principle, if the spectators, the viewers are here, the players, different age groups started to become interested, then it might be possible that we will have a certain development here. What you described, Daniel Kehlmann, is the technological development we've been knowing for a while. TV needed bigger teams, more people than radio stations, and the computer games you described are more complex and require even more people to develop it. I'd like to come back to writing. What does it mean for creatorship, for authorship, if those complicated things are not possible to do on your own? For instance, the death of the author has been said or talked about some years ago, but writing in a digital age, if you want to do these complicated things, as John Burnside said, is this the end of the author? No. The good thing about it is that the model of a novel is someone sits at home alone creating a new world, still exists. It's not neglected by this new technology, and it will exist and I do not worry about this.
Exciting, the idea that novelists stop writing novels. I think it'd be really great if we just talked about them all the time. And actually, we're moving more towards that. I remember the first time I ever appeared at a literary festival. I think I read from my current work for about 40 minutes, and then there was about 5 or 10 minutes questions afterwards. Now, when you go to a literary festival, you maybe read for about 2 minutes to get a feel for the sound of the voice, and the rest of it is discussion, like we're doing now, in fact, in a way. And in fact, that's more fun. Sitting listening to someone read from a book isn't that much fun, but watching people argue, sometimes the argument becomes quite heated, is actually much more enjoyable. And also, I don't know if anybody else here writes long pieces of any kind of prose, reports, novels, whatever it might be. This is not fun. This is not enjoyable. It's hard work. But just talking about things is much more interesting. And what I really want to do from now on to the rest of my life is make little YouTubes of the novels I would like to write, but just a little YouTube slot where I explain in about 3 minutes what the novel would consist of.
We already had that, Manganelli.
Oh, really? Oh, that's a shame. I'm always
Romane in Pillenform. I cannot translate it in English. It was an italienischer Autor, Manganelli.
It was an Italian author called novels in pills form, in pill shape. Yeah. It was big fun. But these are just dreams of the author. An author who writes a novel and thinks, oh, how easy it is to talk about it. But in reality, you are happy that there will be a novel in the end. So I do not want to have a YouTube short version of Glister.
If we come now to the novels, and they are created at the writing desk. So we're speaking about the traditional writer's business. What is obviously a big difference to what we think about when we speak about possible and impossible novels. The side of the publishing house, of the one that publishes your novel, poetry, essays, everything. How is the relationship of this publishing house to the internet and to the possibilities of the marketing. They could say, well, we're not interested in that. We're only interested in things that I can really follow. But what the publishing house does is a different thing. Do you think that, as some say, that the internet, in a way, is the greatest selling machine that we have these times? And that the publishing houses at the moment have to see how they can take advantage, or use this in the best way of the internet. I think the publishing houses have to think how they can use the internet for selling, but I think from the concrete conditions we have, it is not as popular as the libraries we still have here in Germany. In the States, it's different. The libraries are selling less, and they have to close many times. And 25% of electronic books are sold in the States, and the UK are the second biggest buyers of electronic books. I think that the thought that an author that is sold basically based on a Facebook page and where people can click if they like it or they don't like it, I think this is really an illusion. The internet is a platform for selling, of course, but the way this is done at the moment with little YouTube videos or a Facebook page or a Twitter page where the author can just write some little things, what he's just doing at the moment, I don't think this really works. This is what I think about this. I wouldn't say that somebody would buy a book based on that.
Publishing issues right now to do with internet. One is, the reason we have publishing houses, from my point of view, as a reader and a writer, is editors. Editors use their intelligence, discretion, experience, and passion to bring me as a reader the best books they can bring me. Obviously there are market pressures, there are all kinds of cultural pressures, etc. But in general, what makes a publishing house valuable is that there's this, as it were, gatekeeper who's there in terms of quality. On the internet, anybody who wants to can publish their novel, and there's no editor to stand, to act as gatekeeper, which means that if we're not careful, we'll be flooded with garbage. We're actually pretty flooded with garbage already, to be honest. But we will have all of this, and we won't be able to find the golden pieces in among the sewage, as it were. And some of it is perfectly innocent. It's just somebody feels that they've got something to say, and people do have something to say. But one has to learn a craft to say it first, I think, and I think that's what what editors are there for. When I write something badly, my editor says to me, "This is not good enough," or or I have a crazy idea that I want to follow. My editor says, "Well, fine, go and write that for the next 7 years. See who reads that." And that's really important to have that. Now, there's ways one could set up, as it were, editorial activity on the internet. And it's interesting to see the possibilities that might happen, and they might break some of the problems, break through some of the problems that are imposed by markets on book publishing now. One of the big problems with book publishing right now is that I once had a novel, which wasn't a very good novel as it happened, and I'm glad it sank without a trace. But on the back of it, somebody put crime, the tiny little word crime on the very back right-hand bottom of the back. And that meant that when it arrived in the bookshops, it was put in the crime section. And I got hate mail from people. I hate you. I bought this book, I thought it was a crime novel, and it's not a crime novel. And how dare you pretend that your book is a crime novel? Well, because I didn't pretend it was a crime novel. I don't see anything I write as belonging to this these niches, these market niches. And I also had somebody once publicize a book of mine and compare me to Stephen King. They thought that would sell books. And I'm not anything like Stephen King. I love Stephen King and I read Stephen King all the time, but I can't write like him, and I don't even aspire to. I actually got a 3-page email from someone who threatened to come from America to Britain to actually kill me because I had claimed to be like Stephen King. And this is all a result of this problem of marketing, kind of.
Aber das war nicht Stephen King.
It wasn't Stephen King. No, but it was obviously a very devoted fan. and of course, people like Stephen King have very devoted fans. But this is the problem with this marketing thing. And I think, I don't think my editor, say, in London, wants to put crime at the bottom of my book and have it designated for the crime section. I don't think so, anyway. But it would have been nice to have been asked, of course. But that's a really big problem where you could get around that, maybe. You wouldn't say, oh, well, I'm going to try and sell it to this captive audience because they'll buy something with crime written on it. I mean, you could say, look, this is a book. This is a story. Just put it out there. I'm not sure. Maybe that'll provoke publishing houses to think differently about how they market books as well. Right now, I have to say that in all of the countries that I've been involved with in publishing houses are behind the ball, as it were, in terms of what the internet could be used to do. And it isn't just a sales tool. It's a creative tool, and it's a tool for engaging with people. Right now, it's being used pretty crudely by a lot of people. And there was a disastrous problem with the selling of e-book rights, so that people like Amazon got to set the rates at which people bought e-books. That was obviously good for them, but bad for everybody else. And agents and publishers need to really engage with that because, of course, they're running an expensive business. Somebody publishing a book on the internet can just write it, type it up, bung it out there, and then self-publicize. And if you're writing about something squalid, it won't take much self-publicity on the internet to have somebody read it. Oh, this is about my sex life. Oh, well, great, I'm going to read that because I'm really curious. Or this is about my sad upbringing, or those kinds of things, the kind of things that appeal to the kind of more squalid side of our nature. I'm not exempting myself from this. I'll read them too. But that's all you need to do is do that. Just appeal to the baser angels of our being, and away we go. We've got a million seller before you even know it.
Wie passt das eigentlich zusammen,
How does it fit, these strange, well, how you call it, this strange mix? On the one side, you have the net creating a certain community, creating range, borderless communication, and on the other hand, the movement towards privatization, my sex life or whatever you talked about, or Daniel Kehlmann, as you mentioned. You have to set tweets, you have to be present in the internet as a person, you should be recognizable, you should show, give details about your private life. Isn't that a strange mix, don't you think? And authors can get away from it? Well, I think you do not need it. I don't think that people expect you to have a Twitter account. It's a more journalistic tool. Journalists like to write, and journalists say that authors should have a Facebook fan page or should have a Twitter account, and that's it. But it is often portrayed as, for instance, using Twitter is a very special kind of technology and requires a certain competence. And if you know Twitter, you know this is not the case. Even if you're 4 years old, you can use Twitter. You do not need any competences at all, maybe instead of reading and writing, however. It does not mean that I'm not like to think in an unusual way, or that you shouldn't do experimental things in the internet, but it hasn't anything to do with Twitter. And I don't think it is a big wish of the readers that the authors or that the readers like to follow a novel, or that the readers like to follow the author on Facebook or Twitter, knowing whether he is drinking coffee or doing his dishwashing or whatever. I think this is the wish of a lot of journalists to portray themselves as modern and open-minded towards new technologies, but they do not know anything about it, but they confirm they know about it, and they confirm you need it, and I think this is not the case at all. Well, do not misunderstand me. If you want to do it, well, fine, do it. But I think it's not required in a certain form. It doesn't help you as an author, and it's not expected by the readers, and you are not under pressure to do it. I think it's a fantasy.
The paradigm for this is Facebook. Facebook was created by a nerdy young man who wanted to make comments about girls, fellow students, make them public. And I don't see this advance very much beyond that. I mean, it's not just about girls anymore, but, it's basically that. I mean, my students have on their Facebook, they can look at, oh, I'm single right now. So, they can put that out there, and people know that they're single, so that when they see them at a party, they know they can talk to them, It's going to ruin the novel because, I mean, most novels are based on adultery at some point or another, right? And if you know that, that person's not available, so I'm not going to have a relationship with them, what happens to Anna Karenina then? Where's the future Anna Karenina? She had just had that little thing on Facebook saying single or not single. Facebook is inane. It's a ridiculous thing. I refuse to use it. I have an account on Facebook, obviously, but I don't use it anymore because it's so stupid. Twitter, of course, is just the same. I mean, Twitter's even more. Politicians use Twitter. I mean, that sums it up for me. If the House of Representatives can use Twitter, it means it's not worth using. And then there's LinkedIn, all the rest of them. And there's this kind of phony networking. This idea that you have 270 friends. I maybe have 2, and one of them doesn't really like me that much. And I'm happy with the situation. I don't want 270 friends, even if they're phony friends. I want people to know, I want to know there's a decent distance between me and others. On the other hand, I've written 2 books which I completely bare the soul of the person I used to be, and I thought it was worth doing for reasons that the reader can decide whether or not they were valid or not. And so I think there is something, I mean, writers do expose themselves on the page one way or another. You can't help but do that. But the artifice maybe is in exposing just enough and not too much. And that again, this is where editors maybe come in. The story that I love is Allen Ginsberg, when he was 17 years old, wrote some poems, and he sent them to The Dial, the best magazine in America, edited by Marianne Moore. And Marianne Moore sent them back with a rejection slip. And Alan, 17-year-old Alan, had an ego then, he was as big as the one he had later, went to his dad and said, but she rejected my poems. And the father wrote to Marianne Moore and said, please reconsider, he's really deeply hurt. And Marianne Moore, it's in her book, in the book of her letters, that was the short edition of her letters, she wrote back and she explained why she had refused the poems. And one line that sticks out is, she said, at this point, your protagonist went to the bathroom. Unfortunately, we went with him. And I think, this is why you need the editor and the gatekeeper and the critic. You need, and the perceptive reviewer, you need these people to say to you, come on, show us so much, but no more. And that's the art. I think that is the art.
Aber John hat gerade was ganz Wichtiges gesagt.
But John said something very important now. He said, at least it's true for me, for us as also what we find exciting and interesting is when it comes to the technological change in our world, and this is a very profound development at the moment, it's not about a question how can you publish books, how can you use it for marketing. The really exciting question is, how does it change the stories you want to tell? Does it change the daily life of ordinary Joe, so to speak? Does it change the pattern of stories, whether you see someone is single or not? Does it change the social life? And does it change the content of our novels? I think it changes novels. Anna Karenina, for instance, is a different kind of story now. Also, the fact that you do not lose track of people if someone moves away, or you can find him or her quite easily via Facebook or via the internet. There are other services like Facebook, and you can get in contact easily. There is not the big goodbye any longer. You say goodbye, well, you hug each other, you leave, and then 5 minutes later you send the first text message. This is a real, true change of how we live, how we behave, and how we interact. And this is something which changes our daily life and thus affects our stories and the content of our stories. And for me, this is the very exciting question.
John Burnside just said that the publishing houses have a function to be careful or to take attention and to protect the authors. There are publishing houses that don't do that, and that they take influence on their authors, that they have to communicate with the readers, and they have to speak with them about how is the best way to write a novel. And this existed already in the 18th century, that people just tried to take influence on the way how to, on influencing stories. For example, Madame de Graffigny, who wrote these letters of a Peruvian princess. And people from many countries just tried to get her to write a happy end. So this is also a kind of influence on the author. But there are new constellations, new connections, and maybe we could say two things. One thing would be that the aphorism, the very short form, is getting a new form, is having a kind of a renaissance. And on the other side, we have novels that get longer and longer, and they get richer, and sometimes it's just too much. And do you think this has a connection to the internet? Does that somehow connect to each other?
I think the long novels have a connection to word processing. People can make these big, long, convoluted novels and keep track of them, and think they're somehow, because they can keep track of them, think they're somehow significant. There's an argument for long novels. I mean, Thomas Pynchon writes a long novel. I'm going to read it, no matter what it's about, because it's Thomas Pynchon or Don DeLillo. But there are too many long novels now that you think this could have been about a quarter of the length, or even less, in fact, or this could not have existed at all. Even better. The aphorism, though, is an interesting thing. I think digital technology lends itself to kind of maybe not making aphorisms of the type that, the 18th century aphorism, but the kind of modern aphorism. The kind of little, it isn't even a quote, it's a sub-quote that opens up new possibilities. Poets do this all the time, of course. I mean, in a poem, I'm sometimes stunned by, I've got a poem right now, and I read it the other day. Okay, it was a German audience, and maybe they couldn't understand my bizarre accent. I've got a strange accent in English too, But every line had an allusion to another piece of writing, ranging from Shakespeare to Lewis Carroll to all kinds of stuff. Sometimes more than one, and sometimes the Bible, etc. And those tiny quotes in themselves don't mean very much until you can mount them up, and you kind of, there's a kind of overall effect, a kind of rolling effect that kind of makes the work itself richer. But tiny quotes from things. I was walking in Potsdam, and it said, "Ohne Sorge," sorry, Mike, O-H-N-E-S-O-R-G, without care. And I thought, I mean, for me, the word Sorge in German only means in the context of Heidegger, because I'm interested in Heidegger's philosophy, and Heidegger's idea of Sorge. And I thought, wow, you know, this is a really deep town, you know, without Sorge. And I took lots of photographs and sent to friends, sometimes of both words, sometimes just one, and sometimes of the other. And you know, this is fun. You send these things. So you can do that with pictures, images. You can do it with text. And because the internet provides so much connectivity, the internet allows even ordinary intellects like mine to pretend that we're hugely knowledgeable because we can Google anything we like, right? I don't remember what that was, but I can Google it and check, you know. And we can all do that. So you can send something to somebody in a letter, say, and you can make it Googleable so that they can look it up and say, oh, Wikipedia tells me the significance of all this I didn't know before. So, you know, this kind of game playing with quotes and references and sub-quotes and, you know, those kind of things, they're leading to a kind of aphoristic way of existing. And, of course, that's how people talk on TV as well. People talk on American TV in aphorisms and witticisms and meaningful lines, and we don't in real life. You know, I want to talk like House all the time. If you only talk like House, you'd get through life a lot more, much quicker anyway.
You have to have someone who writes your dialogue.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I'm sure Hugh Laurie talks like that all the time anyway, actually. But that kind of sense of that kind of sense of compactness and economy would be, I think digital technology may make us more like that. So you'll be able to say a few words and people say, oh yeah, I get it. I know what you're talking about. Before you used to say a whole paragraph. Now you say 3 or 4 words. Ah, yeah, okay.
Ja.
Ja. Ich glaube, wir haben vorhin schon mal kurz angesprochen.
I think we mentioned in the context of your signatory of the action plan, we are the creators, that this is a topic we cannot avoid when discussing about new digital media and publication possibilities. What's very interesting is that the net is always in a close connection with, on the one hand, the utopia to be open to everything, to be an anti-expert, and in this strange dichotomy is the publishing house and the copyright are the old experts, so to speak, who defend their area. Well, maybe we are all on the wrong track and that the copyright law won't exist any longer, and then are still authors, maybe those people who are rich or who have a different job to earn money, although this wouldn't be the end of the world. This is the case in America, yes. In America, writers give lessons and lectures at universities to earn their money. Well, as I said, yes, but this wouldn't be the end of the world. But I think this is not something we should strive for. On there, I have got a feeling that the situation we face now, is like back in the 60s or early 70s with the author. Namely, of the car. In the beginning of the 70s, they wanted to build a lot of streets, and they think the car is the future, and you need parking space. And I come from New York, where they demolished certain parts of the town because they needed a lot of parking space, and they constructed a lot of underground parking facilities, and they erected houses, awful, ugly houses, and this was a kind of car history back then. There was a movie called Traffic, which made fun of this vision. And what happens now, of course, the car is everywhere. It changes the way we live, but not in that way, and we are very sorry for the parts of West Village which disappeared, or parts of the whole world which were demolished during this historic period, so that they have to pave the way for the car. I think to start it more slowly and to think about it carefully, then it would be better. But a lot of people thought they missed something, and I think you can compare this. you do not to throw things overboard when it comes to copyright law and to change law, which has been in existence for decades, starting back in the 18th century. Because a lot of people fear, well, they lose track or they cannot catch up with a very important development. But in this sense, without thinking too much about it, or I do not think it's necessary to think deeply about it, I signed this action plan because I think it is something very important. As I read it, I thought this is something of like save the animals or save the seals. Well, do you think also there are seals? No, not at all, but you have to sign it. I think it is very important to save the seals, but who would say kill the seals? Maybe only some traders. Of course, I was mistaken. There was this huge storm, people who said, "Oh my God!" And that was something I didn't see up to this moment. That it is really widespread at the moment. There is a different kind of perception that everyone can publish in the internet independently, and those who have publishing houses behind them, those are people who are on the side of those who are in power, who want to have the property, and decent people would publish on their website anyway. I think this is a widespread opinion, I have to say, connected with aggression and defended with a lot of aggression. And I have to confess, I was shocked when I realized it. I was really shocked and I was surprised. Well, it's not that you shouldn't talk about details when it comes to copyright law. Well, 70 years after your death, it's maybe too long, I think 30 years. This is the period of a patent, but a big part of the private party says we are not against the copyright law, but we are not against that it loses its value when the author dies. But I think it's a law, it's a gain. A lot of people fight for a long time, and it's not the family can live off its works after his or her death, but that relatives, families and friends have the right to say what happens to the novel, what happens to the work, how it is used, how it is published, even the author died. And I think these are all things, if you take one step back and look at it from another perspective, I think you shouldn't throw it overboard or turn it around. I think the danger now is a lot of people are afraid of losing track, and I think in 20 years' time people will ask, why did we do it back then? It's very interesting that our German copyright law strengthens those who publishes a book or a novel. The Anglo-Saxon copyright law was focused more on the exploiter. I think this position has been strengthened by the internet. Suddenly the United States were the pioneers against platforms for downloading music in Russia, so the exploiters' rights increased. What role play the different creative people behind it, John Burnside? Because Great Britain is not organized in a different way than, for instance, the United States. What do you think?
Yeah, there's a great movie by Hal Hartley called Simple Men, and they're talking about exploitation, and they're having an argument whether Madonna is better off than other women performers because she exploits herself. She's exploiting herself as opposed to being exploited by business or whatever it might be. I think actually, going back to seals for a moment, I think it's okay to kill seals actually. You know, it's a sentimental view that we shouldn't kill any seals. I think we should kill seals when we're hungry and we have to eat them. In the north of Norway, for example, people do eat seals, and I think it kind of has a kind of broad relevance here, because I think each case should be determined on its own merits. I think I don't really know anything about German copyright law. I assumed that copyright law was just the same everywhere. Thank God it's different somewhere. But in general, of course, copyright and patent laws are there to protect the richest people, not the authors or the inventors. While I was just in Frankfurt working with a colleague, Michael Simmons-Roberts, who worked a lot on the Genome Project, the Human Genome Project. And one of the pioneers of the Human Genome Project had his office, as you entered the laboratory offices, there was those kind of, those flashing things that they usually put the Dow Jones on, or that kind of stuff. And the numbers just flashing across, because if you can get the genome, the code into the public sphere, then it means you can't put a patent on it. If it's in the public sphere, nobody can patent it. And people were patenting bits of the human genome. How can you do that? It seems impossible to me that someone could even conceive that that could be, well, moral, if not legal. But people do that. People grab that and they patent it. And the same thing happens, obviously, with books, or with literary works. All over the world, apparently, there's a phenomenon called cats, which you can go to, apparently, to a theater and watch people destroy the very ghost of T.S. Eliot on stage, night after night after night. But apparently, with the willing collaboration of the estate, it depends on whether or not the estate's smart enough to know what to do with the material. And of course, these things are happening at random. But in general, certainly in Britain and in America, certainly is all law is there to protect the richer. The richer you are, the more the law protects you, obviously. And if you're poor, the law doesn't protect you at all, except by accident. And authors tend to be poor. So I don't see many laws in Britain and America actually protecting authors. That would be a bit counterproductive, really, wouldn't it? Laws are there for the rich, to protect the rich. And they're written by rich people, and they're written by the rich people's lawyers. So, and the ones that are inconvenient will be dismantled by rich people and by rich people's lawyers. So I guess the best thing to do is hang on to whatever you've got, if it's good, if it's better than the alternative.
Ja, also ich stimme schon.
Yes, well, basically I agree. Of course, laws always protect the rich more than the others. But this shouldn't be a reason to make no laws anymore. Maybe we should adapt them better. There's also, I want to confess that many times I look at movies on an online stream. Sometimes I downloaded them. I know this is illegal, but I have done it. But I was so astonished that in many big parts of the population, there is the opinion that this is morally correct. I think it's possible to do something and be conscious that it's not right to do it. I think, for example, to be on a train without a ticket or something, on a bus. But it's just this consciousness. It's a kind of an inconsequent behavior we sometimes have in life. And I think this is okay. But if people then say, oh my God, but if everybody does that, then there would be no movies could be made anymore. And you are the exploiters. It has to be legal to download films. And I think this is, in a strange way, pretentious. It's very narrow-minded. We should be conscious that if we do something that is not wrong, the good thing would be not to be that nobody sees it. The good thing is that what the internet does create this attitude of getting things for free all the time. This is an attitude we have to deal with all the time. I would like to understand why, besides from what you said before, Mr. Kehlmann, what you said that in the States this traditional book market doesn't really exist anymore, almost. Yes, there's a really a simple answer to this. We have no book price fixing. Yes, but the UK, for example, are the next biggest seller of digital products. So this development is also getting very far already. This is something what in Germany is said, that they say, look at them, this is the way it's going to be, because we are always behind, they are ahead. And some people think this is great, some people think this is very bad. And this, what differences do we else have to the old Europe, as to say this is some kind of pragmatism, innovation? Don't we like to deal with progression or progressive developments? I think this is also connected to the fact that there are less and less libraries. I mean, I don't want to make publicity for this, but I, for example, have digital machines for reading. I think it's really comfortable to have, for example, when I'm traveling, a book immediately, or at home, if I need something, to have it immediately. And I don't mind to spend money for books. It's something I love doing. But I buy many books from a momentary impulse, and because I need it now and immediately. And so maybe in an hour I wouldn't be any more interested. But for example, in the States, you don't have these infrastructure on libraries. So this is a real option to get books very quickly. And so this is a real good possibility then to people to get easily and quickly to the books they want to have. And so the American publishing houses had great losses because in many cases they sold many books as an electronic version, but on the other hand also everybody had less incomes because there was no real fixing with the prices. As a lobbyist, we have to think of the business model for the writers. This is no solution. They have these cheap e-books, but we have to deal with a phenomenon that nobody expected, that is with this ridiculous 50 books of grey. That is, for example, a book that suddenly has incredible success because, and there have been studies on that, that people that would be ashamed to read it openly, if you see, for example, because you could see the cover, they buy it as an e-book, and suddenly they can hide the fact that they read it, and suddenly the publishing house that has published that earns more money than ever. So this is a really unique phenomenon, but it shows that sometimes we're safe from a place through something we didn't expect. Do you have an idea if there's a difference between publishing in the Anglo-American world and what is called the old Europe?
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Oh ja, ganz sicher.
This probably will come as a surprise to people here, and I've said it so many times people just laughed, but coming from Britain, and I include America as part of Britain, obviously. That can't be right. But coming to France or Germany, the quality of criticism is higher. There's no doubt about it. There's more column inches of criticism, and it's done better by better people, by literary critics often, which is a kind of strange idea, isn't it? Have literary critics write literary criticism. The quality is better, and that is essential. I mean, I can't say how important I think it is that the central role of editors, critics, people who care about what they read and have the tools to say what's good and bad about what they read, or what they think is good and bad about what they read, and to create dialogue is important. Now, in Britain, with a few exceptions, one doesn't review for money in Britain. I don't suppose you do that for money in Germany either, but one doesn't review for money, one reviews out of love. And I started reviewing a long time ago, and I always said I would not review anything but books that I felt needed someone to try and push them to say, look, this is something worth reading. And I would call an editor and say, I'd like to get 1,200 words on this book. And they'd say, great, okay, off you go. Now, if I call that editor, they might give me 600 words on that book. Or they might say, oh, that book? No, I'm not going to review that. And nothing's changed in terms of my passion for the kind of books I choose to ask to review. But there's less space. And one editor said to me, I said, well, how about 800 words? He said, well, yeah, but the picture would be too small then. And he said, well, why do you have a picture at all? It's a book. It's a review about words. Why is there a picture? And they say, oh, that's a great idea. Well, we can put a picture of a cowboy in there. And you think, why do you want? Because it's a book about the West or something. And this is the kind of thing that happens there. And I'm sure these questions come up here, but it seems to me, reading what I can read and having translated for me what I can't, that people here actually take reviewing and criticism seriously. The other hugely important thing between Britain and the old Europe, as it were, is translation. People here translate books. People in Britain don't translate. I'm staying at the LCB on Wednesday there, and there are people there who are, kind of highly respected translators, and it means something to be a translator. In Britain, it's very rare that somebody will even know who the translator of a book is. And most of the time, they don't get translated anyway because we just buy anything American, we just buy it, right, and put it out there. And I understand that a lot of the translation will be because people are translating English, language American books into German, say. But there is a cultural translation throughout Europe. And I grieve for Britain that and I'm embarrassed today to be speaking in English, but I can speak in other languages occasionally. But I grieve for us that we don't have a translation culture because we don't know what's happening in Europe. I often say to editors in Britain, I can name 10 French novelists off the top of my head who are at least worth publishing, and in 3 or 4 cases are people I consider geniuses who aren't even known, never even heard of in Britain. And that's tragic. I'm sure it's true in German too. It's tragic. We don't have that. We just consume what comes from America, and the review usually consists of the press release regurgitated with a nice picture of a cowboy.
Jetzt sind wir beim Inhalt angekommen und
we've gotten to the content and how criticism deals with literature. We have this concept of content, and there's a new English version, the word content. Content and innovation sometimes in the publishing differ, because what we say to generate new content and not just to publish a new book, or for example to think already about the film, or to integrate possibilities of research. This should be the new way of publishing that is going to wait for us in the future. We could say that by this we're going to disappear into the black hole of the 50s. Do you think that this is really the form of the future, that we're not going to try to experiment with genres of something, but that this is going to be the future of publishing? Well, I think in rare cases this is going to be the case. And, well, we're sitting here in the Bertelsmann house. This is a very strong wish, of course, of the Bertelsmann Trust that this is getting normal to use on a broader level the platforms. Of course, this can be possible in special genres of literature, but to be the daily production of culture, I don't think that this is going to be the case. I think the expectation and of the different media are too different. Even if you can put them all on an iPad. Speaking about copyright, yes, one thing is a copyright, but on the other hand, also the techniques of narrating the different perception or creation of radio books or of novels. Everything is so different. I don't think that the future is in integrating everything into one. That having one product, you have to think already how to integrate the other medias about this special novel or issue. I don't think that this is going to be the behavior of our consumers for the future.
I agree on one level. And certainly, as you know, there's only one way to read poetry, really. Poetry is to have preferably an old book with really good paper, and to open it to a well-thumbed page and smell the smell of the paper and the old ink and all of those things. That's how one should read a poem, and hear the words in one's head again. But there are other experiences. And one of the things that I find interesting, and I work with my students on this, is the movie of the book, and sometimes the book of the movie. You know, because sometimes people think, "Oh, that movie did well. I'll write a book about it." But the movie of the book, and I would love for someone to take a book of mine and make a movie out of it, and I would hope that they wouldn't make the movie be too close to the book. I would hope that they would do something different, and that someone else's creative would bounce off it and do something kind of interesting. And I also, at the end of each year, newspaper editors call me and say, "Can I say a few words about the books that I loved during that year?" And I say, "Why the books? I'm an avid listener to music. I watch movies almost like kind of slavishly, but not Hollywood usually. Why can't I say something about Indian classical music? This year's best. I told you we'd get that in." Releases.
Der Eindruck. Er hat mir vorher gesagt, er findet eine Möglichkeit, klassische indische Musik während dieses Gesprächs zu erwähnen. Ich habe die ganze Zeit gewartet.
Why can't I say something about that instead of being always expected to talk about books? And most people are not novelists or poets or filmmakers. We're multimedia people anyway. We consume and we want to create things in lots of different media. I'd love to be a filmmaker, but I'm just not a good team player. So when you have to get people together to do stuff, I wouldn't work unless I was a director like Sternberg or something, shouting through a megaphone saying, "Do this now!" I wouldn't work. But in my heart, and maybe as much somebody who would like to have made films or made photographs as made poems or books. And I think if we do it right, which we almost certainly won't, but if we did it right, we could liberate that in everyone. The way in which we consume the product, as it were, could be much more imaginative and creative, and the way in which we make it, and more people could make it. We would see films and books and YouTube run things coming out of very poor communities in Bolivia or somewhere in Africa. I mean, right now, how does copyright protect those people?
Speaking of which, also die sozusagen Menschen, die aus armen oder unter
come from poor countries.
People who come from a poor surrounding and educate, we have to say that the electronic reading device offers huge opportunities and possibilities, namely the free of charge possibility of the world literature, the whole range of world literature. I'm always surprised if you see how many works are there without copyright and which is available free of charge. This is a huge library. A lot of works no one can read totally. And of course, this is an enormous opportunity. If you do not have any money, or if you do not have access to real books, then this is a really good opportunity to access literature by only owning one single reading device, or not only a reading device, but it can be a computer. But the other question is how many people will really use it, because the same device which enables you to access literature enables you to watch YouTube videos about funny cats or trailers of the new Batman movie. But some people see that as a really life-changing opportunity, and they will use it. And I think this is a real advantage, balancing out the disadvantages. Especially in the German language area, there are hardly any lists. There's the University Library in Leipzig. There are hardly any libraries to give an overview about what is available in a digitalized way. But in Germany, I think we are lagging behind. I think it's very difficult to find out what classical works there is an e-version. Well, a very important address I mentioned now. Well, a very important address, yes, but there are different ones, like those of the National Library in Washington for English-speaking works. There are overviews and lists, but in Germany it started quite recently. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we can discuss, or we can continue our discussion in a small round. If you might have any questions, if you have to remarks, or you want to say something, you can ask our guests in the break. Now we end our discussion here in this big panel. There are, I think, a lot of different aspects we can continue. I thank Isabel Hindersen and Anne-Kathrin Ende for interpreting. And I'd like to thank John Burnside, and I'd like to thank Daniel Kehlmann. And once again, I'd like to mention we have nice weather, so we'll have a little reception on the rooftop terrace, and then you have the possibility to ask more questions and to enter into a discussion with our two authors. So once again, thank you very much for coming and attending this discussion.